The courtroom froze as the German shepherd's sudden bark thundered through the chamber, aimed straight at the prisoner's shoes. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 7 swung open with a deliberate creak that seemed to announce trouble itself. Daniel Cruz shuffled through the entrance, his orange jumpsuit contrasting sharply against the mahogany-paneled walls. The chains around his wrists and ankles clinked with each measured step, creating a metallic rhythm that echoed through the packed courtroom. But it wasn't the sound of the chains that drew every eye in the room. It was the smirk. Daniel's lips curved upward in an expression that was part amusement, part contempt. His dark eyes swept across the sea of faces. The victim's family huddled together in the front row, their tear-stained cheeks telling a story of months of anguish. The jury, members shifting uncomfortably in their seats, the prosecutors shuffling through their carefully organized papers with furrowed brows. To Daniel, they were all just part of an elaborate game he was confident he would win. "Mr. Cruz," Judge Patricia Hendricks called from her elevated bench, her voice cutting through the murmur of whispers that had begun to ripple through the gallery. "Please take your seat at the defendant's table." Daniel's smirk widened as he made his way forward, his court-appointed attorney, Marcus Webb, rising to pull out his chair. Webb's face was tight with the kind of tension that came from defending clients who seemed to enjoy their notoriety a little too much. But there was someone else in the courtroom who wasn't paying attention to Daniel's theatrical entrance, someone whose attention was focused elsewhere entirely. Officer Laura Hayes sat in the gallery's third row, her crisp blue uniform pressed to perfection, her blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun. Beside her, lying with the disciplined stillness that only came from years of training, was her partner, a magnificent German shepherd named Rex. Rex's ears were perked forward, his amber eyes tracking Daniel's every movement with an intensity that made Laura's pulse quicken. She'd worked with Rex for 5 years, and she knew every subtle shift in his body language. The way his muscles had tensed the moment Daniel entered the room. The way his nostrils flared slightly, processing scents that human noses could never detect. The way his tail remained perfectly still, not relaxed, but coiled like a spring. Something was wrong. "Your Honor," District Attorney Sarah Martinez began, rising from the prosecution table, "the people are ready to present our opening statements in the case of the state versus Daniel Cruz." As Martinez began to outline the charges, armed robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, and conspiracy, Daniel leaned back in his chair with the casual confidence of a man watching someone else's trial. He whispered something to his attorney that made Webb's jaw clench, then turned his attention to the gallery, his gaze sweeping across the faces until it landed on the victim's family. His smirk deepened. Mrs. Eleanor Vasquez, the elderly woman who had been the target of the violent robbery 3 months earlier, sat between her adult son and daughter. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a tissue, her eyes avoiding Daniel's predatory stare. The sight of her fear seemed to energize him, and he had the audacity to give her a small, mocking wave. That's when Rex moved. The German shepherd's head snapped up, his ears rotating like radar dishes homing in on a signal. A low, barely audible rumble began deep in his chest, not quite a growl, but something more primal. Laura's hand instinctively moved to Rex's head, her fingers finding the familiar comfort of his soft fur. "Easy, boy," she whispered. But Rex's attention remained laser-focused on Daniel. Judge Hendricks was explaining the court procedures to the jury when it happened. Daniel had been reaching down to adjust something near his feet. His shoes, Laura would later realize when Rex suddenly lurched forward. The motion was so sharp and unexpected that it startled several people in the nearby rows. But it was what came next that changed everything. Rex's bark erupted through the courtroom like a gunshot, sharp and commanding and filled with an authority that seemed to come from somewhere beyond his training. The sound reverberated off the walls, causing several jurors to jump in their seats and the court stenographer to pause, her fingers frozen above the keys. The entire courtroom fell silent. Judge Hendrix's gavel hung suspended in midair. District. Attorney Martinez stopped speaking, her mouth open on a half-formed word. Even Daniel's perpetual smirk faltered for just a moment, his eyes darting to the dog whose intense stare seemed to burn right through him. "Officer Hayes," Judge Hendrix called out, her voice carrying a note of authority mixed with concern. "Please control your animal." Laura's cheeks flushed as she placed both hands on Rex's shoulders, feeling the tension coiled in his muscles like steel cables. "I'm sorry, Your Honor. Rex, down. Stay." But even as Rex lowered himself to the floor, his eyes never left Daniel. His nose twitched, and Laura could see the way his nostrils flared, as if he were trying to decode a scent that carried information beyond human comprehension. Daniel's smirk returned, but it seemed forced now, less natural than before. He leaned toward his attorney and whispered something that made Webb glance nervously toward the gallery where Laura and Rex sat. "As I was saying," District Attorney Martinez continued, but her voice carried a new tension, "the evidence will show that Mr. Cruz not only committed these crimes, but did so with a callous disregard for human life and dignity." Throughout the rest of the opening statements, Rex remained unusually alert. Every time Daniel moved, reaching for a glass of water, conferring with his attorney, turning to look at the gallery, Rex's ears would perk up, his muscles would tense, and that low rumble would begin in his chest. Laura had never seen her partner react this way in court before. Rex was trained to remain calm and unobtrusive during legal proceedings, a skill he'd mastered during their years of partnership. But today, something was different. It was as if Rex could sense something that no one else in the room could perceive, some invisible thread connecting him to the man in the orange jumpsuit. When the judge called for a recess, Daniel rose from his seat with his characteristic arrogance intact. But as he turned to be escorted back to the holding area, his path took him past the gallery section where Laura and Rex waited. The moment Daniel's foot hit the floor near their row, Rex's reaction was immediate and visceral. The German shepherd shot to his feet, his bark echoing through the courtroom once again, this time accompanied by a snarl that made several people in the nearby seats scramble backward. "Rex!" Laura commanded, but her partner was beyond her usual commands. His entire body was rigid, every instinct telling him that something about Daniel Cruz was fundamentally wrong. Daniel paused in his walk, turning to face the dog with an expression that had shifted from amusement to something harder to read. For a long moment, man and dog stared at each other across the courtroom, an invisible battle of wills playing out in front of dozens of witnesses. "Interesting," Daniel murmured, loud enough for Laura to hear. "Usually, dogs love me." But there was something in his voice that didn't match his casual words. A tremor that suggested Rex's reaction had unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. As the bailiff led Daniel away, Rex finally began to calm down, though his eyes tracked the prisoner's movement until he disappeared through the door leading to the holding cells. Only then did the German shepherd lower himself back to the floor, though his body remained tense, alert, ready. Laura knelt beside her partner, running her hands through his fur and feeling the rapid beat of his heart. "What is it, boy?" She whispered. "What do you know that we don't?" But Rex couldn't answer with words. All he could do was remember the scent that clung to Daniel's shoes, a scent that spoke of dirt and darkness, of secrets buried deep, of truth waiting to be unearthed. As an ABT, the courtroom began to empty for the lunch recess. Laura remained seated, her mind racing with questions. In 5 years of partnership, Rex had never been wrong about someone. His instincts were finely tuned, honed by years of training and experience. If Rex believed Daniel Cruz was hiding something, then Daniel Cruz was hiding something. The question was, what? Outside the courtroom windows, storm clouds were gathering, casting shadows across the marble floors. The afternoon session would bring witness testimony, expert analysis, and carefully crafted arguments from both sides. But Laura had a feeling that the most important testimony might come from a source no one expected. A German shepherd, whose bark had just announced that justice was about to be served, whether Daniel Cruz was ready for it or not. The smirk that had carried Daniel into the courtroom was gone now, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like concern. And in that moment, Laura realized that her partner had just fired the opening shot in a battle that would determine whether truth or deception would ultimately prevail. Rex settled his head on his paws, but his ears remained perked, his senses attuned to dangers that only he could detect. The afternoon would bring new revelations, new challenges, new opportunities for Daniel's carefully constructed lies to crumble. And when they did, Rex would be ready. The fluorescent lights in the courthouse hallway buzzed with an electronic hum that seemed to match the tension thrumming through Laura's veins. She knelt beside Rex in the quiet corridor outside courtroom 7, her hands working through his fur as she tried to understand what had triggered his unprecedented outburst. "Talk to me, boy," she whispered, studying his amber eyes for clues. "What did you smell? What did you see?" Rex's ears twitched at the sound of her voice, but his attention kept drifting back toward the courtroom doors. Even now, 30 minutes after Daniel Cruz had been escorted away, the German shepherd remained agitated, his powerful frame coiled with an energy that Laura had rarely witnessed outside of active crime scenes. "Officer Hayes?" Laura looked up to see District Attorney Martinez approaching, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. The prosecutor's usually immaculate appearance showed signs of strain. A few strands of dark hair had escaped her professional bun, and there was a tightness around her eyes that suggested the morning's proceedings hadn't gone as smoothly as planned. "Ms. Martinez." Laura rose, keeping one hand on Rex's head. "I want to apologize for the disruption." "Rex isn't usually—" "Don't apologize," Martinez interrupted, her voice carrying an urgency that made Laura pause. "I've been prosecuting cases for 15 years, and I've learned to pay attention when a trained police dog reacts like that." She glanced down at Rex, who was studying her with the same intense focus he'd shown in the courtroom. "Has he ever done anything like this before?" Laura shook her head. "Never. Rex is trained for courtroom appearances. He knows how to remain calm and unobtrusive during proceedings. But today—" She trailed off, remembering the way her partner's entire body had gone rigid the moment Daniel entered the room. "Today he acted like he recognized something," Martinez finished. "Or someone." The prosecutor's words sent a chill down Laura's spine. She'd been thinking the same thing, but hearing it spoken aloud gave the possibility a weight that made her stomach clench. "Ms. Martinez, you don't think—" "I think," Martinez said carefully, glancing around to ensure they wouldn't be overheard, "that we need to consider every possibility. The case against Cruz is solid, but it's largely circumstantial. We have evidence placing him near the crime scene. We have testimony from witnesses who saw someone matching his description, but we don't have the smoking gun." She paused, studying Rex again. "What if we've been missing something?" Before Laura could respond, the courtroom doors opened and Marcus Webb, Daniel's defense attorney, stepped into the hallway. His usually pristine suit looked rumpled, and there were beads of perspiration on his forehead, despite the courthouse's aggressive air conditioning. "Officer Hayes," Webb said, his voice carrying a forced casualness that didn't quite mask his agitation. "Quite a show in there. I trust your partner will be better behaved this afternoon?" Laura felt Rex's muscles tense under her hand. The dog's lip curled back slightly, revealing a glimpse of white teeth, and that low rumble began in his chest again. "Rex will be fine," Laura replied evenly, though she wasn't entirely certain that was true. "He's a professional." Webb's smile was thin and didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, it's just that outbursts like that can be prejudicial. Juries sometimes read more into animal behavior than they should. Dogs can be unpredictable after all. They might react to any number of stimuli: stress, unfamiliar scents, even something as simple as a defendant's cologne." "Rex doesn't react to cologne," Laura said quietly. "No?" Webb's eyebrows rose. "Then what do you suppose set him off?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that none of them wanted to voice. Laura could see Martinez watching the exchange intently, her prosecutor's instincts clearly engaged. "I wouldn't presume to speculate," Laura replied, "but I can tell you that in 5 years of partnership, Rex has never given me a false positive. When he alerts to something, there's always a reason." Webb's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "Well, I'm sure the court appreciates your confidence in your animal's abilities. I just hope that confidence doesn't lead to any unfortunate assumptions." With that, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the marble corridor. Laura watched him go, noting the tension in his shoulders and the hurried pace of his stride. For a defense attorney who'd been projecting confidence all morning, Webb suddenly looked like a man with a lot on his mind. "Interesting reaction," Martinez murmured once Webb was out of earshot. "Very." Laura looked down at Rex, who had finally begun to relax now that the defense attorney was gone. "What do you think he's worried about?" "The same thing we should be worried about," Martinez replied. "The possibility that there's more to this case than meets the eye. As Chen continued his testimony, Laura found herself studying those black sneakers again. Size 10 athletic shoes. Exactly what Daniel was wearing right now. But there was something else, something that nagged at the edge of her consciousness. During a brief recess, Laura approached Detective Chen in the hallway. "Mike, you mentioned the footprints in the garden. What kind of soil was back there?" Chen looked puzzled by the question. "Standard suburban stuff, I guess. Some flowers, a small vegetable patch. Why?" The victim's daughter mentioned that her mother remembered the attacker's shoes making a particular sound, like he was walking on gravel, even though he was inside the house. "Interesting." Chen pulled out his phone and scrolled through his photos. "I took pictures of everything. Let me see. Here." He handed Laura the phone, showing her crime scene photos of the victim's backyard. Laura studied the images, noting the neatly maintained flower beds and the small area where vegetables grew in dark, rich soil. But there was something else visible. In one of the photos, an area near the back fence where the earth looked different, more disturbed. "What's that section there?" she asked, pointing to the photo. Chen squinted at the screen. "Looks like maybe she'd been doing some gardening recently. Could be where she planted something new." But Laura was thinking about Rex's reaction, about the way his nose had been working overtime every time Daniel moved his feet. What if the German Shepherd wasn't just detecting something unusual about the shoes themselves? What if he was detecting something on them? Or in them? "Mike, Were the shoes tested for soil samples? Standard processing. We checked for blood, fibers, that kind of thing. I don't think anyone specifically tested for soil composition. Chen's expression grew more interested. You thinking there might be something there? Before Laura could answer, Marcus Webb appeared beside them, his face wearing an expression of practiced concern. Officer Hayes, Detective Chen, I hope you're not discussing testimony outside of court. That would be highly irregular. Just casual conversation, Chen replied smoothly. Nothing case-related. Webb's smile was thin. Of course. It's just that my client has already been subjected to one irregularity today with your dog's performance. I'd hate for there to be any suggestion of impropriety. Laura felt Rex's muscles tense where he sat beside her. The German shepherd's eyes were locked on Webb, and that familiar rumble had started deep in his chest again. Your dog seems agitated again, Webb observed, taking a step backward. Perhaps he should wait outside for the remainder of the proceedings. Rex stays with me, Laura said firmly. He's not causing any disruption. But even as she spoke, Rex's behavior was becoming more pronounced. His ears were pinned forward, his nose working actively, and his attention seemed focused on something near Webb's feet. That's when Laura noticed it. A small clump of dark soil clinging to the sole of Webb's expensive leather shoe. Excuse me, she said suddenly. Mr. Webb, where did you have lunch today? Webb looked startled by the question. What does that have to do with anything? Just curious. You seem to have picked up some dirt somewhere. Webb glanced down at his shoe, and Laura saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, followed quickly by what looked like concern. I took a walk in the courthouse garden during the lunch break, he said, but his voice carried a tension that hadn't been there before. Needed some fresh air to prepare for this afternoon's session. Rex's rumbling grew louder, and Laura suddenly understood. The German shepherd wasn't just reacting to Daniel Cruz. He was reacting to something both men had in common, something that connected them to a specific place, a specific scent. The courthouse doesn't have a garden, Detective Chen said quietly. Just a parking lot and some decorative concrete planters. Webb's face flushed. I misspoke. I meant the small park across the street. There are walking paths there. But Laura was already thinking ahead, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place with frightening clarity. Rex's training included the ability to detect trace evidence that humans couldn't perceive. He'd been trained to alert to everything from drugs, to explosives, to specific scent signatures that could connect suspects to crime scenes. What if Rex was detecting soil? Not just any soil, but soil with a specific composition, a specific scent signature that connected both Daniel Cruz and his attorney to a particular location? Mr. Webb, Laura said carefully, you mentioned earlier that dogs can react to all kinds of stimuli, unfamiliar scents, stress, even cologne. That's correct. But what if Rex isn't reacting to unfamiliar scents? What if he's reacting to familiar ones, scents he's encountered before, perhaps at a crime scene? The color drained from Webb's face so quickly that Laura thought he might actually faint. I don't know what you're implying, but I'm not implying anything, Laura interrupted. I'm just wondering why a trained police dog would have the same reaction to both a defendant and his attorney, particularly when that reaction seems focused on their shoes. Detective Chen was staring at Webb now, his experienced eye taking in the attorney's obvious discomfort. You know what, Marcus? Maybe we should take a closer look at those crime scene photos after all. Specifically, the soil samples. Webb took another step backward, but Rex was already on his feet. his powerful frame blocking the attorney's path toward the courtroom doors. The German Shepherd wasn't aggressive, but his intent was clear. He wasn't going to let this man simply walk away. "This is harassment," Webb said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You have no right to—" "We have every right to investigate new evidence," Chen replied, "especially when that evidence is literally right under our noses." As if to emphasize the detective's point, Rex moved closer to Webb, his nose working actively near the attorney's shoes. The German Shepherd's tail was rigid, his entire body language screaming that he'd found what he was looking for. Laura pulled out her phone and quickly dialed a number. "Crime scene unit? This is Officer Hayes. I need a tech at the courthouse. Immediately. We may have trace evidence that needs to be collected and analyzed." Webb's professional composure finally cracked completely. "You can't just— This is a fishing expedition based on the behavior of a dog." "A dog who has never given us a false positive," Laura replied calmly. "A dog who is trained to detect trace evidence that can connect suspects to crime scenes. A big dog who seems very interested in the soil on your shoes, Mr. Webb. Mr. Webb." The implications of what Laura was suggesting hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If Webb was connected to the crime scene, if he had somehow been at Mrs. Vasquez's house, then the entire case took on a dimension that no one had considered. Daniel. Cruz's smirk had long since faded, replaced by an expression of growing panic. He was staring at his attorney with wide eyes, as if seeing the man clearly for the first time. "Marcus," Daniel whispered, his voice carrying a note of betrayal. "What did you do?" But Webb wasn't looking at his client anymore. He was staring at Rex, at the dog whose bark had just shattered what must have seemed like a perfect plan. And in that moment, Laura realized that the truth was far more complicated than anyone had imagined. The prisoner's smirk had been justified, but not for the reasons they'd all assumed. The crime scene technician arrived at the courthouse within 30 minutes, carrying a kit that contained everything needed to collect and preserve trace evidence. Laura watched as the tech, a methodical woman named Sarah Kim, carefully scraped soil samples from both Webb's shoes and, at Detective Chen's insistence, from Daniel Cruz's sneakers as well. "I want these analyzed immediately," Chen told Kim as she sealed the samples in evidence bags. "Priority rush. And I want the results compared to soil samples from the Vasquez crime scene." Webb had grown increasingly agitated during the collection process, his protests becoming more shrill with each passing moment. "This is completely irregular. You can't just collect evidence from an attorney without proper warrants." "Actually, we can." District Attorney Martinez had appeared, having been summoned by Detective Chen. "Particularly when that evidence is in plain view and potentially relevant to an ongoing criminal case." Her voice carried the steel of a prosecutor who sensed blood in the water. Daniel Cruz sat in stunned silence, his orange jumpsuit seeming to hang more loosely on his frame as the reality of the situation began to sink in. The confident smirk that had carried him through months of legal proceedings had been replaced by something Laura recognized from years of police work. The look of a man watching his world collapse around him. "Rex," Laura murmured, kneeling beside her partner. "Good boy. Whatever you smelled, whatever you detected, you may have just cracked this case wide open." The German Shepherd's tail wagged once, a brief acknowledgement of her praise, but his attention remained focused on Webb and Daniel. Even now, with the evidence collected and sealed, Rex continued to show signs of alertness that suggested his work wasn't finished. While they waited for the lab results, Detective Chen pulled Laura aside for a private conversation in the courthouse's security office. "What's your read on this?" he asked, settling into a chair across from her. "Your partner doesn't react like this without good reason." Laura chose her words carefully. "Rex has been trained to detect trace evidence that humans might miss. His reaction to both Cruz and Webb suggests they've both been in contact with something distinctive, something that left a scent signature strong enough to trigger his alert response. The soil samples? That's my best guess. But it's more than that, Mike. Rex doesn't just detect foreign substances. He remembers them. If he's encountered this particular scent profile before, at a previous crime scene or during training exercises, he would recognize it again. Chen leaned forward, his expression growing more intense. Are you suggesting that Webb and Cruz have both been to the Vasquez house? I'm suggesting that Rex believes they've both been somewhere that left the same distinctive trace evidence, on their shoes. Whether that's the Vasquez house or somewhere else, Laura shrugged. That's what the lab results will tell us. 2 hours later, Sarah Kim called with preliminary findings that sent shockwaves through the prosecution team. The soil composition is distinctive, Kim reported over the speakerphone in Martinez's office. High clay content with traces of specific organic compounds that suggest recent fertilizer application. Most importantly, the soil from both Webb's and Cruz's shoes contains microscopic fragments of a particular type of limestone gravel, the kind used in high-end landscaping applications. Martinez leaned forward in her chair. And the comparison to the Vasquez crime scene? Perfect match. The soil composition, the limestone fragments, even the fertilizer traces. Everything matches samples collected from Mrs. Vasquez's backyard. Garden. The silence that followed this revelation was profound. Laura felt her heart racing as the implications became clear. Both Daniel Cruz and his attorney had been at the crime scene, but the original investigation had only placed Cruz there. There's something else, Kim continued. The soil samples from Webb's shoes are fresher than the ones from Cruz's shoes. Based on the degradation patterns and moisture content, I'd estimate that Webb was at the location more recently, probably within the last few days. Webb went back, Laura said quietly. He went back to the scene. Detective Chen was already reaching for his phone. We need surveillance footage from the Vasquez neighborhood for the past week. Traffic cameras, security systems, anything that might have captured Webb in the area. Within an hour, they had their answer. Traffic camera footage from 2 days earlier showed Marcus Webb's distinctive Mercedes sedan parked 3 blocks from Mrs. Vasquez's house. The timestamp indicated he'd been there for approximately 45 minutes, more than enough time to walk to the house and back. But it was the security footage from a neighbor's camera that provided the most damning evidence. The grainy black and white video showed a figure matching Webb's description walking through the Vasquez backyard, spending considerable time in the same garden area where the original footprint evidence had been collected. He went back to plant evidence, Martinez said, her voice tight with anger. Or to remove it. Laura thought about Rex's behavior, about the way the German Shepherd had reacted not just to the soil traces, but to something deeper, more fundamental about both men. There's something we're missing, she said slowly. Rex's reaction wasn't just about the soil. He was responding to both of them as if they represented a threat, as if he recognized them both as dangerous. Detective Chen pulled up the case files on his laptop, scrolling through witness statements and evidence reports. What if Webb wasn't just Cruz's attorney? What if they were partners? The possibility hung in the air like a challenge to everything they thought they knew about the case. Laura remembered Webb's obvious distress when Rex had first barked at Daniel's shoes, the way the attorney had immediately tried to explain away the dog's reaction. A defense attorney working with his own client to commit crimes, Martinez mused. It would explain how Cruz stayed one step ahead of our investigation for so long. Inside information about police procedures, evidence collection, prosecution strategies. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Webb would have had access to all aspects of the investigation against his client. He would have known exactly what evidence prosecutors had, what witnesses they planned to call, what weaknesses existed in their case, and he would have been in the perfect position to help Cruz avoid detection or to manipulate evidence in Cruz's favor. We need to re-examine every case Webb has defended in the past 2 years, Chen said grimly. If he's been working with criminals instead of defending them, there could be dozens of unsolved crimes with his fingerprints all over them. Laura's phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor Vasquez's daughter. "My mother is ready to speak with you. She says she remembers more details about that night than she told the police." "Mrs. Vasquez wants to talk," Laura announced. "Her daughter says she has more information about the attack." An hour later, Laura and Rex sat in Eleanor Vasquez's modest living room, the elderly woman's frail hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since grown cold. Despite her age and the trauma she'd endured, her dark eyes were sharp and alert. "The police, they didn't want to listen to all the details," Mrs. Vasquez said, her accented English clear and precise. "They said I was confused because of the shock. But I wasn't confused. I remember everything." Rex lay quietly at Laura's feet, but his ears remained perked, as if he understood the importance of what they were about to hear. "Tell me about the sounds you mentioned to your daughter," Laura prompted gently. "The sounds the attacker's shoes made." Mrs. Vasquez nodded, her expression growing distant as she revisited that terrible night. "He came through the back door, very quiet at first. But when he walked across my kitchen floor, his shoes made this strange sound, like grinding, like he was walking on small rocks, even though my floor is smooth linoleum." "And you're certain about this detail?" "Absolutely certain. I've lived in this house for 37 years, Officer Hayes. I know every sound it makes. Those shoes, they had something on them that made that grinding noise with every step." Laura thought about the limestone gravel fragments that the lab had found embedded in both Cruz's and Webb's shoes. "Mrs. Vasquez, did you see the attacker? Clearly?" "It was dark, but I saw enough. Medium height, medium build. Nothing distinctive about him except—" She paused, her brow furrowing in concentration. "Except what?" "Except that he seemed to know where things were. He went straight to my jewelry box, straight to where I keep my emergency cash. Most robbers, they would search, make noise, turn things over. This man, he knew exactly what he was. Looking for and where to find it." A chill ran down Laura's spine. "Mrs. Vasquez, had you ever seen this man before? Even briefly? Perhaps in passing?" The elderly woman was quiet for a long moment, her fingers working at the edge of her teacup. There was something familiar about him, but I couldn't place it at the time. "The police, they showed me photos, and I identified the young man they arrested. But I kept thinking there was someone else, someone I'd seen before, maybe at the grocery store or the bank, someone who might have watched me, learned my routine." Laura felt Rex stir at her feet. The German Shepherd's attention suddenly focused on something outside the window. She followed his gaze and saw a dark sedan parked across the street. The same make and model as the Mercedes they'd seen in the surveillance footage. "Mrs. Vasquez," Laura said quietly, "I need you to move away from the window. Right now." The elderly woman must have heard something in Laura's voice, because she immediately set down her teacup and moved toward the interior of the room. Laura pulled out her phone and quickly dialed Detective Chen's number. "Mike, I think we have a problem. I'm at the Vasquez house and there's a car outside that matches Webb's vehicle. I think he's watching us." "Stay put," Chen replied. "I'm sending backup. and I'll be there in 10 minutes. But even as Laura ended the call, she saw the sedan's door open. Marcus Webb stepped out, his expensive suit looking incongruous in the modest neighborhood. He began walking toward the house with the determined stride of a man who had nothing left to lose. Rex was on his feet now, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Every instinct the German Shepherd possessed was screaming that danger was approaching. "Mrs. Vasquez," Laura said, helping the elderly woman toward the back of the house. "Is there a back door we can use?" But even as they moved, Laura heard the sound of the front door handle being tested. Webb wasn't just watching anymore, he was trying to get inside. And Laura had a sinking feeling that the corrupt attorney had come to finish what Daniel Cruz had started 3 months earlier. Rex's growl deepened, and Laura knew that whatever happened next, her partner would be ready to protect them both. The German Shepherd had detected the truth from the moment Daniel Cruz walked into that courtroom, and now that truth was about to come crashing down around everyone involved. The sound of splintering wood echoed through Mrs. Vasquez's living room as Webb forced his way through the front door. Laura pushed the elderly woman behind the couch and drew her service weapon, her heart pounding as she heard heavy footsteps moving through the house. "Officer Hayes!" Webb's voice carried a desperate edge that made Laura's skin crawl. "I know. You're here. I just want to talk." Rex positioned himself between Laura and the doorway, his powerful frame coiled and ready. The German Shepherd's lips were pulled back in a silent snarl, every muscle in his body prepared for combat. "Mrs. Vasquez," Laura whispered, "stay down and stay quiet. Help is coming." The elderly woman nodded, her face pale but determined. "I'm not afraid," she whispered back. "Not anymore." Webb appeared in the doorway to the living room, his expensive suit disheveled and his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of complete breakdown. His eyes darted frantically around the room until they settled on Laura's weapon. "You don't understand," he said, his voice cracking with strain. "This has all gotten out of hand. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. Put your hands where I can see them," Laura commanded, her weapon trained on Webb's center mass. "Detective Chen is already on his way. Don't make this worse for yourself." Webb laughed, but it was a broken sound devoid of humor. "Worse? Officer Hayes, you have no idea how bad this already is." He took a step into the room, and Rex's growl deepened to a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. "Control your dog," Webb snapped, but his bravado was obviously forced. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm here to explain." "Then explain," Laura said, keeping her weapon steady. "Explain how a defense attorney ends up working with his own clients to commit crimes." Webb's face crumbled, years of carefully constructed lies finally breaking apart under the weight of truth. "It started small," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Information trading. I'd tell certain clients about prosecution strategies, evidence collection procedures. In exchange, they'd cut me in on their scores. So you became a criminal yourself." "I became practical." Webb's voice rose, anger flashing in his eyes. "Do you have any idea how much money defense attorneys make compared to what criminals steal in a single night? I was watching my clients get rich while I struggled to pay my law school loans." Laura heard the sound of sirens in the distance, but they were still several minutes away. She needed to keep Webb talking, needed to keep him from doing anything desperate. "Mrs. Vasquez wants to talk," Laura announced. "Her daughter says she has more information about the attack." An hour later, Laura and Rex sat in Eleanor Vasquez's modest living room, the elderly woman's frail hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since grown cold. Despite her age and the trauma she'd endured, Her dark eyes were sharp and alert. "The police, they didn't want to listen to all the details," Mrs. Vasquez said, her accented English clear and precise. "They said I was confused because of the shock. But I wasn't confused. I remember everything." Rex lay quietly at Laura's feet, but his ears remained perked, as if he understood the importance of what they were about to hear. "Tell me about the sounds you mentioned to your daughter," Laura prompted gently. "The sounds the attacker's shoes made." Mrs. Vasquez nodded, her expression growing distant as she revisited that terrible night. "He came through the back door, very quiet at first. But when he walked across my kitchen floor, his shoes made this strange sound, like grinding, like he was walking on small rocks, even though my floor is smooth linoleum." "And you're certain about this detail?" "Absolutely certain. I've lived in this house for 37 years, Officer Hayes. I know every sound it makes. Those shoes, they had something on them that made that grinding noise with every step." Laura thought about the limestone gravel fragments that the lab had found embedded in both Cruz's and Webb's shoes. "Mrs. Vasquez, did you see the attacker? Clearly?" "It was dark, but I saw enough. Medium height, medium build. Nothing distinctive about him except—" She paused, her brow furrowing in concentration. "Except what?" "Except that he seemed to know where things were. He went straight to my jewelry box, straight to where I keep my emergency cash. Most robbers, they would search, make noise, turn things over. This man, he knew exactly what he was. Looking for and where to find it." A chill ran down Laura's spine. "Mrs. Vasquez, had you ever seen this man before? Even briefly? Perhaps in passing?" The elderly woman was quiet for a long moment, her fingers working at the edge of her teacup. There was something familiar about him, but I couldn't place it at the time. "The police, they showed me photos, and I identified the young man they arrested. But I kept thinking there was someone else, someone I'd seen before, maybe at the grocery store or the bank, someone who might have watched me, learned my routine." Laura felt Rex stir at her feet, the German Shepherd's attention suddenly focused on something outside the window. She followed his gaze and saw a dark sedan parked across the street. The same make and model as the Mercedes they'd seen in the surveillance footage. "Mrs. Vasquez," Laura said quietly, "I need you to move away from the window. Right now." The elderly woman must have heard something in Laura's voice, because she immediately set down her teacup and moved toward the interior of the room. Laura pulled out her phone and quickly dialed Detective Chen's number. "Mike, I think we have a problem. I'm at the Vasquez house and there's a car outside that matches Webb's vehicle. I think he's watching us." "Stay put," Chen replied. "I'm sending backup, and I'll be there in 10 minutes. But even as Laura ended the call, she saw the sedan's door open. Marcus Webb stepped out, his expensive suit looking incongruous in the modest neighborhood. He began walking toward the house with the determined stride of a man who had nothing left to lose. Rex was on his feet now, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Every instinct the German Shepherd possessed was screaming that danger was approaching. "Mrs. Vasquez," Laura said, helping the elderly woman toward the back of the house, "is there a back door we can use?" But even as they moved, Laura heard the sound of the front door handle being tested. Webb wasn't just watching anymore, he was trying to get inside. And Laura had a sinking feeling that the corrupt attorney had come to finish what Daniel Cruz had started 3 months earlier. Rex's growl deepened, and Laura knew that whatever happened next, her partner would be ready to protect them both. The German Shepherd had detected the truth from the moment Daniel Cruz walked into that courtroom, and now that truth was about to come crashing down around everyone involved. The sound of splintering wood echoed through Mrs. Vasquez's living room as Webb forced his way through the front door. Laura pushed the elderly woman behind the couch and drew her service weapon, her heart pounding as she heard heavy footsteps moving through the house. "Officer Hayes!" Webb's voice carried a desperate edge that made Laura's skin crawl. "I know. You're here. I just want to talk." Rex positioned himself between Laura and the doorway, his powerful frame coiled and ready. The German Shepherd's lips were pulled back in a silent snarl, every muscle in his body prepared for combat. "Mrs. Vasquez," Laura whispered, "stay down and stay quiet. Help is coming." The elderly woman nodded, her face pale but determined. "I'm not afraid," she whispered back. "Not anymore." Webb appeared in the doorway to the living room, his expensive suit disheveled and his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of complete breakdown. His eyes darted frantically around the room until they settled on Laura's weapon. "You don't understand," he said, his voice cracking with strain. "This has all gotten out of hand. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. Put your hands where I can see them," Laura commanded, her weapon trained on Webb's center mass. "Detective Chen is already on his way. Don't make this worse for yourself." Webb laughed, but it was a broken sound devoid of humor. "Worse? Officer Hayes, you have no idea how bad this already is." He took a step into the room, and Rex's growl deepened to a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. "Control your dog," Webb snapped, but his bravado was obviously forced. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm here to explain." "Then explain," Laura said, keeping her weapon steady. "Explain how a defense attorney ends up working with his own clients to commit crimes." Webb's face crumbled, years of carefully constructed lies finally breaking apart under the weight of truth. "It started small," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Information trading. I'd tell certain clients about prosecution strategies, evidence collection procedures. In exchange, they'd cut me in on their scores. So you became a criminal yourself." "I became practical." Webb's voice rose, anger flashing in his eyes. "Do you have any idea how much money defense attorneys make compared to what criminals steal in a single night? I was watching my clients get rich while I struggled to pay my law school loans." Laura heard the sound of sirens in the distance, but they were still several minutes away. She needed to keep Webb talking, needed to keep him from doing anything desperate. "What about Mrs. Vasquez?" Laura asked. "An elderly woman living alone. Was she really worth terrorizing for whatever money she had?" Webb's expression grew more agitated. That was never supposed to happen. Cruz was just supposed to case the house, gather information. But he got greedy, decided to move early without telling me. "So you tried to cover it up." "I tried to minimize the damage," Webb shouted. "I made sure Cruz had competent representation. I was going to get him a plea deal, keep him quiet about our arrangement. It would have worked if your damn dog hadn't..." Rex's bark cut through Webb's words like a blade, sharp and commanding and filled with an authority that made everyone in the room freeze. The German Shepherd took a step forward, his amber eyes locked on Webb with an intensity that spoke of judgment and justice. "He knows," Mrs. Vasquez said quietly from behind the couch. "The dog knows what you are." Webb's face went white. "Animals don't know anything. They're just..." His words were cut off by the sound of cars screeching to a halt outside the house. Detective Chen's voice called out through a bullhorn, "Marcus Webb, this is the police. The house is surrounded. Come out with your hands up." Webb spun toward the window, panic evident in every line of his body. "They can't prove anything. The soil samples, The surveillance footage. It's all circumstantial." "Actually," Laura said calmly, "Mrs. Vasquez just identified your voice. She remembers hearing you talking to Cruz outside her house on the night of the attack. You were the lookout." The elderly woman rose from behind the couch, her frail frame somehow radiating strength. "I remember now," she said, her voice clear and steady. "You were arguing with the young man, telling him to hurry up, to take only what you'd discussed. You called him by name. Danny, you called him." Webb's face went through a series of expressions: denial, anger, and finally, defeated recognition. "You were unconscious," he whispered. "The report said you were unconscious when we left." "I was pretending," Mrs. Vasquez replied with quiet dignity. "My grandmother taught me that sometimes the best defense is to let evil people think they've won, while you remember every detail for later." The admission hung in the air like a confession. Webb had just admitted to being present during the crime, to being part of the conspiracy that had terrorized an innocent woman. "Marcus Webb," Detective Chen's voice came again, closer now. "We're coming in." Webb looked around the room desperately, like a trapped animal seeking an escape route that didn't exist. His eyes settled on Mrs. Vasquez, and Laura saw something ugly flicker across his face. "She's lying," he said, taking a step toward the elderly woman. "She's confused, traumatized. Her testimony won't hold up in court." Rex moved like lightning, placing himself directly between Webb and Mrs. Vasquez. The German Shepherd's snarl filled the room, a primal sound that spoke of protection and vengeance in equal measure. "Don't," Laura warned, her weapon tracking Webb's movement. "Don't even think about it." But Webb was beyond rational thought now. "I can't go to prison," he babbled. "I'm a lawyer. Do you know what happens to lawyers in prison? I can't—" He lunged toward Mrs. Vasquez. Whether to grab her as a hostage or to silence her permanently, Laura would never know. Because Rex was there first. The German Shepherd's attack was swift, precise, and devastatingly effective. He caught Webb's arm in his powerful jaws, using his momentum to drive the man to the ground. Webb screamed in pain and terror, but Rex held him firmly, his training overriding any impulse toward excessive violence. "Stay down," Laura commanded, moving to cover Webb while Rex maintained his hold. "Don't move." The front door burst open, and Detective Chen rushed in with 3 uniformed officers, their weapons drawn and ready. The sight that greeted them was one of perfect justice. A corrupt attorney held captive by the same kind of police dog whose instincts had first detected his guilt. "Rex, release," Laura commanded, and the German Shepherd immediately let go of Webb's arm, though he remained poised to act again if necessary. As the officers handcuffed Webb and read him his rights, Laura knelt beside her partner, running her hands through his fur with fierce pride. "You knew," she whispered. "From the moment you saw them in that courtroom, you knew they were both guilty." Rex's tail wagged once, a modest acknowledgement of praise he had more than earned. 2 hours later, back at the courthouse, Laura watched, through the small window in the holding cell door, as Daniel Cruz sat alone on the narrow bench. His orange jumpsuit seemed to swallow his diminished frame, and the cocky smirk that had defined his courtroom appearances was nowhere to be seen. "Saktiori, long do you think he'll get?" Detective Chen asked, joining her at the window. With Webb's testimony about their criminal partnership, the new charges related to Mrs. Vasquez's case, and evidence of at least 6 other robberies they committed together? Laura shook her head. "He'll be lucky to see daylight before he's 60. "And Webb?" "Longer," District Attorney Martinez said, appearing beside them. "Conspiracy, robbery, assault, tampering with evidence, and violation of attorney-client privilege." He's looking at life without parole. Through the window, they could see Daniel slumped forward, his head in his hands. The reality of his situation had finally penetrated the arrogance that had sustained him through months of legal proceedings. His attorney, his criminal partner, had confessed to everything in exchange for a plea deal that would keep him off death row. "What I don't understand," Chen said, "is why Webb went to the Vasquez house that night in the first place. Why risk being seen at the scene?" Martinez consulted her notes. According to his confession, Mrs. Vasquez's house wasn't random. Webb had been handling her late husband's estate settlement 2 years ago. He knew she kept cash and valuable jewelry in the house, and he knew her routines. He was supposed to be Cruz's intelligence source, but Cruz got impatient and moved too early. So Webb went to clean up the mess his partner had made, Laura concluded. Exactly. He thought if he could remove some of the evidence Cruz had left behind, maybe plant some false clues to throw off the investigation, he could protect their operation. Martinez smiled grimly. He never counted on a German shepherd's nose being more accurate than his legal strategy. Rex, who had been resting quietly beside Laura's chair, lifted his head as if he understood they were talking about him. His tail gave a single satisfied wag. "Good boy," Laura murmured, scratching behind his ears. "You solved this case before any of us even knew there was a case to solve." Later that evening, Laura and Rex sat on the porch of their small house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. The German shepherd lay with his head on Laura's lap, finally relaxed after the day's dramatic events. "You know what the best part is?" Laura said, speaking to her partner as if he could understand every word. "Mrs. Vasquez gets to see justice done. Real justice. She'll never have to wonder if the people who hurt her are walking free." Rex's ears twitched at the mention of the elderly woman's name. They had visited her again after Webb's arrest, and she had insisted on giving the German shepherd a homemade treat and a gentle pat on the head. "You protected her when it mattered most," Laura continued. "Just like you protected all of us by refusing to let those 2 criminals fool everyone in that courtroom." As if summoned by their conversation, Laura's phone buzzed with a text message from Mrs. Vasquez. "Thank you and Rex for everything. I sleep peacefully tonight knowing that justice has been served. Your dog is a hero." Laura showed Rex the message, and the German shepherd's tail wagged with what she chose to interpret as understanding. Heroes came in all forms, she reflected. Sometimes they wore badges and carried guns. Sometimes they wore black robes and carried gavels. And sometimes they wore fur and carried the unshakable conviction that truth would always triumph over deception. The prisoner had smirked in court, confident that his lies would protect him. But he hadn't counted on Rex's bark, a sound that had shattered not just his composure, but an entire criminal conspiracy that had been hiding in plain sight. Justice, Laura had learned, sometimes came with 4 legs, a wet nose, and an absolute refusal to be fooled by the masks that evil people wore. And in a world where truth was often obscured by legal maneuvering and carefully crafted deceptions, that kind of pure, instinctive honesty was more valuable than gold. Rex stretched and yawned, the day's work finally complete. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new challenges, new opportunities to serve and protect. But tonight, there was only the satisfaction of knowing that 2 dangerous criminals would never hurt anyone again, and that an elderly woman could sleep peacefully in her own home. The German shepherd's bark had indeed been the sound of justice, swift, sure, and absolutely uncompromising. And Laura couldn't have been more proud to be his partner.